to festivals. But this is Kirsten Thompson. She is the head of film studies department at Seattle University. And I teach there as a adjunct professor once a year, teach producing. And she has kindly signed on board as a moderator for the film. She saw the film, I believe, Kirsten, you saw it theatrically, and then you just saw it again on video. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And I think you've got a little bit of background, Kirsten, on who the players are here. Jagger Gravning, obviously writer-director, David Call, lead actor, and Rich Adler, co-producer and consultant. And so I'll put it in your capable hands, and let's have a discussion about Wallflower, all things, past and present and future.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for participating in today's discussion. It's nice to meet you all. And if you're wondering what my accent is, I'm a Kiwi from New Zealand.
Thanks for clarifying.
I'd like to invite you.
It didn't sound like Brooklyn.
No, not Brooklyn, although I did live in New York.
I ruled that out
years.
right away.
Yeah.
I always like when people anticipate the question that people they meet are going to have, so they just sort of, it's Kiwi.
I'm putting it out there now. I'm not Australian. So welcome everyone, and I'd like to invite you each to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the role that you played in the making of the film or in the acting of the film. So why don't we start with John?
All right, my name's John W. Comerford. I am a producer and also worked for a couple of years on story development on the motion picture screenplay for Wallflower. And that's my role as head of the film unit, and that's what I do.
Great. And one thing could you add, everyone, if you could tell us one thing that you hope audiences will come away from after having watched the film. So John, do you?
Sure. If there was one thing, I would just hope it would be in deep level of engagement with the film, with its images and sound, and ultimately the questions that the film hopefully poses to the audience.
Absolutely. David.
Yes. Hi, I'm David Call. I played the murderer, shooter, nameless guy. And if there's one thing that I would hope that audiences would take away from this, it's get to a therapist. Take care of yourself and whatever demons might be in there before they eat you and everyone else.
And mental health is a major issue, especially at times like now under COVID-19.
Yeah, and especially for men. I would amend that to men get to a therapist.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, David. Jagger.
I'm Jagger Gravning, writer-director of the film. The question about what do I hope people take away, I'm always disappointed when I hear the filmmaker explain what they want somebody to take away from the film, because it's sometimes it's disingenuous, and even if it seems sincere from the filmmaker themselves, it's kind of unsatisfying and reductive. I heard Scorsese say that if I could explain exactly why I was compelled to make this, then I wouldn't have had to make it. In a more general, universal sense, just engage people on an emotional, human level.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned Scorsese, because the films that he makes, of course, explore questions of masculinity and violence in particular. And violence itself has been a long theme in the history of cinema. We might think of course, Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, or Henry McNaughton's portrait of a serial, John McNaughton's portrait of a serial killer, or Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. But these are also dealing with fictionalized violence, whereas Wallflower is engaging with a real life case, even if perhaps in a altered form. So how do we engage with films that address difficult, violent, or socially difficult to process topics like this? What kinds of steps do we take in the making of the film? Perhaps we could start with Jagger.
I mean,
and
that's
how you approach this.
specifically with doing with a real life subject. You mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really been at the heart of the whole process of making the film, especially since we're making the film in the same city where the actual tragedy itself took place. So, I mean, all throughout the process of the film, like there's this added layer of sensitivity around the issues and trauma around the issues. So, yeah, I mean, that's one element that was there. But while writing the film, I was not really thinking so much in like a global sense. I was really more thinking of it as just like personal human experiences and a very specific human story, rather than trying to engage or connect that with any threads of film history, how it's been done before, or with specifically trying to thread that needle of many of these social issues. I was really just trying to focus on the specific human elements and humanize the people in the film. And through this very making it as specific as possible. And I think that sort of allows it to become universal and connect to these broader issues by making it specific.
You obviously involved real life survivors in the case, and there was a real massacre. In fact, several histories of different massacres in Seattle. Was there a specific choice to make it abstract, to not name the individual who was involved in the 2006 incident, or to make other changes in the story to fictionalize it or to partially fictionalize it? What were your thoughts about that boundary between reality and fiction?
Well, so the characters in the film, I deliberately changed the well, of course, the names and the ages, and genders and all these. You can't like look at the characters in the film who were the victims and connect them
to
the real life people. And when I'm talking about the film, I try never to mention the real names. I think that's just a separate thing, and these are fictional characters. So that was deliberate, for privacy reasons and that sort of thing. I actually did have the killer's real name for like the longest time. I can't remember when we changed it. John, do you remember, or Richard, do you remember how close it was to filming when we changed it? It was right when we started filming.
Yeah, Rich can speak to that, because Rich, you were an important part of that discussion, which I think we all had in your office.
Yeah, wasn't it like when I first got to Seattle, so like early December or around Thanksgiving or something like that?
Richard is the one who impressed upon us the need to not use the killer's real name.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Richard Adler. I'm a forensic and clinical psychiatrist, and I was involved in the film fairly early on. And what drew me to the film is just as you heard it, Jagger was coming at it from a very pure artistic direction. And I think he was really, what is great art? It's people also writing what they know. And when I read the script, it was so unbelievably real. And painted a picture of a scene I didn't really know much about, but which actually occurred very close to my office at the time. And I knew all too well about the terrible, horrible event this was in the history of the city of Seattle. And I was really unbelievably drawn. Now, Jagger's motivations, I think, were artistic and pure. Mine, however, I had a real agenda. And my agenda was that as a forensic psychiatrist who does not like to see people get killed in massacres, I know that movies are the most powerful vehicle that exists. And I'm going to put a plug in for a great book, Criminology, goes to the movies. It's all about that. That what a lot of people know and understand about crime, for better or for worse, comes through movies. And there has been this trivialization of these massacres and the false idea that people just snap and that there's nothing you can do. And it was clear to me that this movie could break through and to essentially undercut those destructive myths.
How about for you, David, as an actor approaching a difficult subject, inhabiting the role of the murderer? What was going on in your mind and in your approach to your craft?
Well, I mean a lot, but I remember one thing. I was talking to a friend of mine, my friend Antonio, who directed this movie, Christine, which is about the Christine Chubbuck case in the 70s, the newscaster from Florida who committed suicide on air. And it's a great movie. And I was talking right before I did Wallflower, and I was like, how did you approach a story where your protagonist kills himself at the end, like self-destructs at the end? Like, and I asked him, like, how do you build tension? Like, how do you tell that story, especially when, most of the audience is going to know that that's going to happen? And he was like, my whole thing was that every moment you had to see it coming, but you had to believe that it wasn't going to happen, that she would figure out a way to see through her problems and not do it. And so the whole time that sort of changed my frame of reference on him. So it was like, because, I had to ask, why does this guy hang out at the party all night before he does this? Like, why does he talk to all these people? And it was like, he doesn't want to. And so that was a really big window for me into, like, I guess a little bit of his humanity, and the fact that it was this struggle that he was going through the entire time, almost to save that little piece of his humanity. And, hopefully that's what you can show to the audience to some degree, is that, like, there is, even up until the last second, I wanted there to be just a little hope, up until obviously what happened. It's awful. But so that, I think, was sort of a really important kind of like guiding thing for me throughout all of it.
And playing with that temporality too, it really came across to me watching it again with the editing together of the, before and after moments that are being fused together at various moments as he's walking through the house. I wonder if Jagger or John, if you want to talk about how you imagine the script and the narrative structure, and that hope that David is talking about, that the audience is being produced in the audience for that event that we know happens right at the beginning of the film to not happen as we're watching it. What were your thoughts in imagining the structure of the film and how to tell this story, and how did the script perhaps evolve as you worked through it?
Yeah, I think at the very, very earliest version of the script, I don't think the shooting was at the beginning, but that was like way like literally first draft. But pretty early on, I decided that I wanted the shoot at the beginning, because it was kind of like it was almost like this something we had to get over in order to engage with the present. And then also just like on a simple level, I just didn't want to end the film with the shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And then, people leave, those are the final images, especially since the film isn't really about the characters being dead. It's really about them being alive during this night, from my perspective. So, so that was really one of the, once I made that decision, it felt right. And even though we had some counsel from some, filmmakers I respect to change that, we ultimately decided to keep that, all throughout editing process. We could have changed it, but yeah,
and that I think was a central conceit when we were working on the script, and something that we really stuck to. And I remember the evening we were having the discussion after filmmakers' input, other filmmakers input at a screening, industry screening who were, pretty insistent on putting the shooting at the end of the film. We had a lively discussion with our amazing editor and executive producer, Robinson DeVore, Jagger, and myself, and decided we were committed to keeping the shooting itself at the initial part of the film, and we really committed to that fully at that point, given post-production. And the other thing, Jagger, I was thinking about you and Rob's work in the edit bay, and I can't remember if we had exactly plotted out those cut points in terms of time structure in the script itself, or that was something that you discovered with Rob in the edit bay, those in points and out points.
Are you talking about where we cut back to the shooting in a couple points?
Yeah.
I don't believe that was in the script. I think that we sorted that out in the editing.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know, do you remember with Rob, was it just was that an accident that happened, or how did that, how did you make a decision to do that? Because it is a risk, obviously. You've got to be able to make it work in terms of the crafting of the film, and then it has to work in terms of the pacing and rhythm. It's a pretty big commitment.
Yeah, well, there's two parts. I can't remember exactly the decision-making process there, but I will say that there's essentially two parts of the shooting itself, or the shooting sequence, which is, there's the part where he approaches the house and starts shooting people, and then after that he is just wandering around the house with the guns, and he has opportunities to shoot people. He shoots through a door, but of course he could have broken down that door quite easily. But we're sort of cutting back into these phases where he's sort of cooled down from that initial spree, and he's no longer this kind of hard killer. So obviously he is, but he's sort of realizing that this is not the dissatisfaction of those elements. So then we're sort of trying to do a counterpoint between him, these points in the film where he's feeling angry with somebody, usually because of something, an interaction that he has self-sabotaged, and then he projects his anger on the other person. But then we would kind of do a counterpoint to that aspect of the shooting where he's not taking revenge at those points. He is wandering around in this sort of haze about, like, probably thinking like, oh my God, like, what did I do? And I've read this, theories on this, and I think it's probably true that I think the mass shooters, certainly some of them, don't find the act as satisfying as they hoped, and I think that's one of the reasons he did stop. Like, it was a mixture of the guilt when he realized what he had done to these people he'd been speaking with all night, and the fact that it's not satisfying. It doesn't solve anything.
The thing that I love so much about this film and the people who've made it is that the truism, the degree to which Jagger intuitively almost is clued in, and that this is a real depiction, as real as you can get without being some kind of, docudrama, documentary. It's lyrical and it's artistic, but in terms of really getting underneath and understanding, almost from a textbook level, that and Jagger and I didn't have this conversation. I didn't know what his take on it is, but we know from a criminologic perspective that folks who do this crime have rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed that opening barrage. And so and you see it beautifully depicted in the film. I use beautiful in quotes, but he comes in and that is savagely transacted, right? Because he knows that. And just as Jagger said, the rest of it, one of the things is that if you know about mass murders and you know how long they last, how many fatalities, how many bullets, that when you compare that to what occurred in this crime, you can beautifully intuit, as Jagger did, that this is not a typical mass murderer, and that the humanity is reflected in that going around in a haze. And Jagger just intuitively hit the nail on the head.
Well, I was really struck, of course, that haze quality of the rave party itself. and by the beautiful cinematography in depicting that scene, the slow motion, the use of music, and the gorgeous neon colors, in addition to, of course, the costuming of the individual characters. So it's a formally, aesthetically beautiful film. I'm really struck, notwithstanding its difficult subject matter and the complexity with which it gives insight to this character and what's going on with him psychologically. Jacob, maybe you can talk a little bit about the filmmaking production process itself and the kinds of decisions you made with the heads of departments, the cinematographer, the decisions that you made around the depictions of actually shooting the actions of violence. How was it for making this film for you?
Well, I guess the big overarching decision in terms of production technicalities and realities is the fact that because it's a low budget film, technically SAG guidelines ultra low budget, but it's I wanted to. That's why it essentially takes place in basically one location to simplify production, and so that actually obviously affected the scope of the film in a very deliberate way. Right from the writing phase. So once I had that decision, okay, basically it's going to be one location. You know, we tried to make each room of the house have a different feeling. And so, you know, the basement or the bedrooms and different times of day. You know, you go into like the basement and it's very trippy and there's you know, but then if you go into like the kitchen's very deliberately this sort of like pedestrian, like standard home's kitchen, and that's where David kept retreating to back to like that was his safe space there, back to the fridge. So
and
sorry?
they were really nice details on the fridge too, right, with the stickers on the fridge and and those exchanges between David and Link's character, which have a different quality from the flickering lights that are playing over the characters in the basement, right? Scene.
Yeah.
I was so moved when I saw the first footage come in by Mike Sildum, our cinematographer's work in those close-up scenes. There's a scene in particular where David, your character is having a moment of potential intimacy with I think it's Noob Girl, and you're talking about, or she's relating her experience at the rave, and she's really high on Molly, and that sort of intercutting there back and forth is such a uniquely personal space, and your character is in this moment, and I think the audience is too, where they're thinking, wow, this could actually be a breakthrough, you know, for this character, and you've got us right where you want us, Jagger, as an audience. And you know, I'm not going to spoil the outcome of that exchange, but yeah, Mike just did an amazing job photographing that, and you know, you and Rob working together in the editorial to create that sense of possibility for the character.
Yeah, we were even turning on and off the sound of the fridge cycling deliberately, at very specific, deliberate moments. Like it's silence now, okay, and then yeah. So I think there's also some fluorescent light sounds in there too. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a really important prop, I think. Really an important part of the mise en scene. How about let's think about after the film is produced and it's ready for audiences. I imagine there's extreme care that needs to be made in regards to showing the film and marketing the film, given the terrible effects of violence on the community of Seattle and on the survivors themselves. What has been your approach, all of you, to bringing the film to the public, both as a director, as an actor? Maybe we could start with David and then go to Rich to talk about the mindfulness that's necessary in dealing with a difficult subject like this film. David?
That's a good question. I mean, I think Well, I think just the word mindful is what's important. I think that approaching audiences, and I really sort of commend John and Jagger for doing this from the get-go, in a spirit of openness, and also with the understanding that the people are going to misunderstand your intentions or what it is, or even if they don't, they may just not agree with them. But I think if you approach something with mindfulness and intention, and as someone who has been in Hollywood and around the industry for, I guess, a while now, I'm constantly shocked at like how little thought goes into even much bigger productions than ours, and even when you're dealing with sensitive subjects, that people just don't, they don't think so. I think that what we did from the beginning, even just meeting with Rich and just meeting with the survivors and talking through it, I think setting your intentions from the get-go and then being as transparent as you possibly can about those with the audience from the get-go is really the key.
And what perspective did you have, Rich, to guiding, the planning of this and then the ultimate release of the film, given the sensitivity of the subject matter?
It seems to me that a lot of what occurred almost was fortuitous and like unspooled itself. That's the way it feels. Along those lines, when I was first contacted, the actual reason that John had for contacting me is that an investor indicated that they wanted to have a percent of profits go to some charity. And so John said, well, Rich, what charity should it be? We hardly knew each other at the time. And the short and long of it is, it just seemed natural. I said to John, that charity needs to be the actual real survivors, not a theoretical group of people, but the real community who suffered directly. And over the course of time, that emerged or developed into the notion that I kind of held firm to throughout, was that in terms of human decency and dignity, the film had to be shown to the survivor community before its general release.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something, thank goodness, I'm very appreciative to John and everybody on the film, that they provided me with funds, a sizable amount of funds, so that this could actually happen. And the movie was shown at the Seattle Center, again, the resonance and valence of that. And I trained a group of 8 seasoned veteran mental health professionals who were literally there at the showing. And again, thank you, John, and everybody on the movie. We literally built what I called a psychotherapy village that was separate and apart, with separate rooms, curtained rooms, so that people could be debriefed. And we had a victim advocacy clinic who was there and was able and willing to sign people up for any and all services. So that was the kind of care that we were able to extend.
You also had custom-made cookies.
Custom-made cookies. Were there other decisions that you made, Jagger, about the messaging or the marketing of the film, and, steering that line between a real-life case and a fictionalized, transformed, dramatic?
Yeah. Well, the marketing stuff is all John's purview mainly, but yeah, I mean, as I mentioned right at the beginning, like, this is like such a concern, right? Being right here in the heart of it. It's not like we're making it in a different city. I mean, the actual shooting took place like, I guess like 2 miles from where I am right now. Richard, was saying like this film, the potential of the film to traumatize or re-traumatize people, and that you have to take this seriously and take these steps to help people process the existence of the film, or prepare people affected by it directly. That's why Richard's been such a help all through here. And then regarding the marketing, of course, taking the name of the killer away from the film. We did that before we started filming. Again, that was Richard. Which also I think that's actually a benefit to the film, just artistically anyway, because people didn't really remember his name or know who he was anyway. If you want to speak to how you handled marketing decisions, John.
Sure. I think the foundation piece for me, from a producer's perspective, because while Jagger and the rest of the artists are focused on the creation of the film, I'm also focused on that more so creatively in the script development process in this case. But I'm really interfacing with the world outside of the film while they're, looking very closely at creating it. They need that obviously tunnel vision to be successful artistically. And one of the moments at the beginning of the film when we were attempting to shoot some coverage shots at an actual rave in Seattle, and we brought the cast down to this rave spot. And I had talked to one of the promoters of the rave ahead of time, let them know I was coming and that we were coming and the cast would be down there. And they agreed to let us come down and be a part of it if we would provide them with a copy of the footage. One of the, accidents of the evening was that I was running late getting to the set, so to speak, or to the event. And David and the cinematographer were there, and they had been doing some shooting outside of the venue. Well, a couple of the other promoters who were not, clued in to the fact that the third promoter had granted permission, they really buttonholed me. And both of them, or one of them in particular, was at the rave the night that all this occurred in 2006. And very, very quickly, I saw, his PTSD flash on me, and it escalated to the point where, there could have easily been, in different circumstances, violence, because it was that intense between us. But fortunately, Jagger was called over, and this promoter recognized Jagger from back in 2006, and that de-escalated that moment. And I won't give it the full, push behind it, but really the words I'll never forget from this promoter was, "We don't talk about this." And in that moment, like, that was a thing that really drove a lot of decision making for me. And certainly in no uncertain terms, with the person's face pegged right next to mine, screaming that, I realized what, the foundation element of PTSD looks like and is. And it is non-sequential, and it's triggerable in any way, shape, and form based upon things that you have no idea about going on in the other person. So that helped with sensitivity on the film.
Sure. So when a film lands, in Seattle, and with specific people who have survived this event, or who are reminded of other events which have analogies to this event, it can have such an intense emotional resonance. And I'm wondering about where the film lands with us now, at this moment, this very strange moment in our personal histories and in our global history, right? It's an era of pandemia. It's an era of Black Lives Matter and change, civil unrest, and a re-evaluation of the role of policing in our culture. So perhaps as a way of concluding, let's think about how we can think about where Wallflower lands with us today, several years after its making, but in a changed cultural moment. What are your thoughts on this? Let's start with maybe Jagger.
Man, that's a difficult question, because I'm still trying to process. Like, every day I wake up and I can't believe there's this pandemic going on, first of all. And then on top of that, civil unrest and Black Lives Matter. Especially right here in Seattle. There was another there was another killing, this morning or last night at Chop, and it's just, I mean, how this relates to what's going on, I barely grasp what's going on now. If you see what I'm saying, it's so big. I mean, everything that's going on, but certainly, before we made the film, or when we were making the film, writing the film, we didn't even have the term incel, for example.
Right.
Now that's common nomenclature. And then, moving further on into, this angry white guy with a gun motif that seems to be recurring in our society. Obviously, the murderer in our film fits in. I don't know if prototype is the right word, because prototype probably goes back to the Old West or something like that. But I'm still kind of trying to process the world right now, to be honest, to tell you how I think the film fits in. Maybe John or Richard or David.
David.
Yeah. One of the things that I always sort of felt that the film was about and that the killer was struggling with was masculinity and American masculinity and American masculine culture, and sort of violence inherent in all of that. And, at the time we were making it, I was reading a lot about incels, and I sort of viewed him, the killer, through the prism of sort of those guys. And I think there's, he definitely was sort of a part of that, or from that part of the spectrum. But, as time goes on now, I see more echoes, not with nerdy school shooters, but with a lot of the police. And having been to some of the protests here in Brooklyn and having seen some very large angry policemen, and having been roughed up by the NYPD in the past, it occurs to me that there really are no sort of the standard bearers of this really kind of violent, repressive American masculinity. More and more is the police and police culture.
A kind of an institutionalization of that, right?
Yeah, that unhealthy masculinity has been institutionalized, I think, in police departments more than probably any other aspect of American life, because I think in other aspects of American life, like the military, professional sports, or whatever, there's accountability. There are checks in place to keep people on the straight and narrow to some degree, but the police just have none. And so I'm now more struck by the echoes there than.
Rich, what do you think as a psychiatrist as to how this film lands at this cultural moment and in relation to questions of violence and to institutional violence?
Now, I know that this film has only been made a couple years ago, but I view it as a classic. And I view it as a classic because it feels like it could have been made yesterday. The themes are very fresh, and the theme was made before the Pulse massacre, and it was made before the massacre Sandy Hook. And so what I found chilling and grisly and horrible is that the film had been made, and as it was, or as it's in production or development, all these other things are happening that really hit the same exact themes. I'm just going to, for the sake of fairness, put a little minor point in, which is that if you know the full details of this story, what you also have to note is that there is a heroic act of the policeman who responds to the scene.
Absolutely.
And in all fairness, that must be bookmarked. And the fact, if you want to really get, drill it down, the policeman, the real policeman who responded to the scene, who was involved in our development of the film,
Right. Yeah.
he was not appropriately supported, assisted, and his pain and anguish um, really went on possibly to this current day, and he attended the premiere. And so the cycle of traumatization affects everybody. It's not simply, or it's not that simple. There's traumatization all around that needs to be recognized and attended to.
Yeah, I really feel like, you know, particularly listening to the contributions and thinking here by Jagger and David and you, Rich, in terms of how the film is landing today. I was thinking about, you know, well, trying to get out of thinking and more into feeling about what I'm feeling right now. And part of, you know, my job as a producer is to try and be in touch with spirit of time and with zeitgeist. And when Jagger and I met years ago to develop the screenplay, I had an intuitive sense that this was an important story, not only because Jagger was involved directly with people who did not survive, and also a survivor in the film, which gave it a level of authenticity, and because of the talent of his writing, clarity and sort of eminent possibility to be unrolled on or unfurled onto the screen, meaning that cinema was a good mode of artistic expression for this story. Those two things combined, and what I felt, you know, going all the way through that moment that I described previously outside of the Seattle rave, where I was confronted with PTSD, is that simply there is a, and has been a long time gestating compression within society and within, you know, male culture, male American culture, which, you know, traditionally comes out in spasms of violence through history. And the one that we're in now, and, you know, I absolutely credit Jagger and the incredible film unit for having the courage and the commitment to go into the idea of gender roles in the film and really work with that in a cinematic capacity to offer up, you know, both masculine and feminine, anima and animas, you know, traits, and really explore them using the tools of cinema in a way that is rare. And the medium does it so well, but to go in there and really probe around and see where do these two things meet, how are they separate, and when they are dysfunctional and they are distorted, what actually happens in the world. And I think we're sitting right now on this powder keg, which is, you know, really is blown up now. And hopefully, you know, we all take a look at what it means to deal with these excess traumas and this walking PTSD that is just around the corner for a lot of different people.
Jake, I hate to heap all this, all these compliments on you, but
That's fine. Keep it coming.
all right. But you know, I was involved in looking at the script intermittently throughout the process, and I couldn't get any red pencil on the thing. It was just, I was continually amazed at how elegantly, and I just want to point one thing out about that the actual person who committed this crime, his father was a Vietnam veteran. And from everything that I had researched, it was clear to me that there was likely a great deal of trauma in the father that then interjected itself in the family life and the divorce that the parents had and the arrangements that the divorce took. And the way, when I saw the film, like the first cut, and I saw that the protagonist is watching old movies about Vietnam veterans, I just thought, this is too, I didn't see it coming. It wasn't in the script that I could remember. And it was just so spot on. It, in a very deft hand, it really got right to the kind of seminal issue so beautifully. And
And also just there was a poster too, that destroy this brute. And, you know, the evocation of earlier moments of the military and, of course, of warfare itself. So
Yeah. So
But let me just say this, because I want a little to go around to everybody. So then you've got David Call. And David is getting into the character to such a degree that he is sleeping with a gun in the room. I mean, and when I saw the before and after. When I first met David, I'm like, hey, this is some pretty boy, right? This is like a, you know, a poster person. And then when I saw him in my office before he started shooting, I'm like, this guy scares me. He is banging his head against the wall. He's sleeping with guns. And so, you know, there's just in my mind, every part of this, all the cylinders were firing.
Well, I wanted to just touch on quickly regarding the posters and the Vietnam. So there's one element there that's more than just the culture of masculinity and violence, but as Richard was alluding to, there's a very direct transmission of the violence and trauma of war from the parent of the person who's been in the war to their children. Is it called? I always forget. Is it transgenerational PTSD or intergenerational?
Intergenerational.
Okay, intergenerational PTSD.
Yeah.
So that was one of the decisions I made. Is that he was suffering from intergenerational PTSD.
Right. And the great thing with Jagger is, you know, he took some notes and then really capitalized on them, used them just in such a pithy, direct, elegant way. You know, that's the artistry, the lyricalness that was just incredible to me.
Yeah, and I just got to say, because it's just popped up in my mind, in my heart, that I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I can say from first-time experience, being in rooms where there's real, genuine trauma on a regular basis that's intergenerational, that, you know, without methods and practices associated with reducing the effect of that trauma on people, we are just being in a world of hurt. And I just know that, you know, both from my own life and from the people around me, it's very real. And society has got to get a grip on it being a priority.
What I think, taking a page there from you, John, is that what I think is great about the film, despite, you know, my clear sense of an agenda, right, is that this film is not preachy. It's not giving a lecture. It's not wagging a finger, right? It really, so to speak, I think gets the point across because of the direct experiential quality.
Yeah, it really approaches with insight all of the individuals involved with real empathy, and that's what gives it this tremendous charge. Are there any other concluding comments that anyone want to chip in about the film or issues that they haven't been brought up so far, of which, of course, there are many? Well, I want to thank you all for the remarkable achievement that you put together. It's a beautiful film. Like I said, I just was so struck by its, well, the lyricism that Rich was talking about before, and the amazing performance that David did, and just the artful way that you put it all together collectively as a talented group of individuals. Thank you for bringing this into the world. And it'll be great for students to look at this, talk about it, and continue to think about it for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. And also I wanted to thank, just to my right here, Amanda Bedell is our publicist on the film. She was not involved in the conversation, but has been listening, I'm sure, carefully to what we've been doing and taking notes to assist the film on its path on the way. So thank you, Amanda. Yeah. Thank you, Kirsten.
Can't wait to see what you'll do next.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.